In war, there are soldiers, and then there are ghosts. Aaron Cole was the latter, the kind of Navy SEAL other operators spoke about in hushed tones. 27 successful infiltrations, 0 casualties, a shadow that moved through enemy compounds, like death's quiet cousin. They called him the Phantom because you never saw him coming. You just woke up later, broken but breathing, wondering what kind of man could take down an entire fortified position without firing a shot. But in Maple Grove, all Ethan Walsh and his racist crew saw was a black mechanic who kept to himself, who detailed his cherry-red Mustang each morning, honoring a promise to his late father, who looked away when they harassed people of color, who stayed quiet when they vandalized homes and businesses. They mistook his stillness for weakness, his silence for fear. They were about to learn why that was a mistake you only make once, because sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who choose to be peaceful, until someone forces them to be otherwise. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The morning sun cast long shadows across Aaron Cole's driveway as he ran his hand along the pristine curves of his 1967 Mustang. The cherry-red paint gleamed under his touch, each reflection a testament to countless hours of restoration. He paused at the driver's side door, his weathered fingers tracing the small photograph laminated beneath the clear coat, a younger version of himself next to his father, both grinning widely in matching mechanics' uniforms. "Another perfect morning for a drive, Dad," Aaron murmured, his deep voice barely above a whisper. The ritual was as much a part of his morning as breathing. 20 minutes before his shift at Thompson's garage, just enough time to feel the engine's purr and remember. The Mustang's engine turned over with a deep rumble that echoed off the nearby houses. A curtain twitched in the window next door. Mrs. Patterson peeking out again, her face pinched with familiar disapproval. Aaron pretended not to notice, just as he pretended not to notice how she'd crossed the street yesterday when he'd walked past her on the sidewalk. Maple Grove was that kind of town, not openly hostile, but full of sidelong glances and whispered conversations that died when he entered a room. After 2 years, Aaron had learned to live with it, had mastered the art of being invisible despite being one of the few black men in a town of 10,000. The drive to work took him past the town square, where early morning joggers and dog walkers populated the neat paths between carefully maintained flower beds. Aaron spotted Howard Bennett walking his golden retriever, watched as the older man's casual wave faltered when he recognized Aaron's car. The wave turned into a quick adjustment of his baseball cap, his eyes finding something fascinating in the distance. "Morning, Howard," Aaron said through his open window, knowing the greeting wouldn't be returned. It never was, but his father had taught him that courtesy cost nothing. The memory of James Cole's voice echoed in his mind. "Son, you can't control how they act, but you can control how you respond. That's your power." The familiar scent of oil and rubber greeted Aaron as he pulled into his parking spot behind Thompson's garage. The early morning light painted the old brick building in shades of amber, glinting off the row of cars waiting for repair. He grabbed his lunch from the passenger seat, a brown paper bag containing a sandwich and an apple just like his father used to pack. "Hey, Aaron!" Danny Miller's voice carried across the parking lot. The 19-year-old apprentice mechanic bounded over, his earnest face split by a wide grin. "Man, the Mustang's looking sweet today. Did you do something different with the finish?" Aaron allowed himself a small smile. Danny was one of the few people in town who seemed genuinely blind to color, treating Aaron with the same enthusiastic curiosity he showed everyone. "Just a fresh coat of wax last weekend. You've got a good eye, kid. Think you could teach me sometime? About restoration, I mean. My uncle's got this old Chevelle rusting in his barn, and I've been thinking." A sharp voice cut through the morning air. "Miller, those oil changes aren't going to do themselves." Frank Thompson stood in the garage doorway, his bulk filling the frame. The owner of Thompson's garage had hired Aaron despite the town's whispered disapproval, though whether from genuine fairness or desperate need for a skilled mechanic, Aaron had never been sure. "Coming, Mr. Thompson," Danny called back, shooting Aaron an apologetic look before jogging toward the garage. Aaron followed at a more measured pace, nodding to Frank as he passed. Inside, The familiar symphony of tools and engines filled the air. The percussion of wrenches against metal, the whine of pneumatic tools, the bass rumble of engines turning over. This was Aaron's sanctuary, where the only thing that mattered was the work. He was elbow deep in a transmission when the first rumble of trouble rolled through the open garage door. The sound of modified exhausts, deliberately loud and aggressive, echoed off the buildings. Aaron didn't need to look up to know who it was. Ethan Walsh's voice carried easily into the garage. "Would you look at that? They really will let anyone work on cars these days." Laughter followed, the kind that carried more menace than mirth. Aaron continued working, his movements deliberate and focused. He'd learned long ago that some people mistook stillness for weakness. They didn't understand that true strength lay in choosing when not to act. "Hey boy, I'm talking to you!" Ethan's boots scraped against concrete as he entered the garage. The smell of leather and cigarettes preceded him, along with the nervous silence that fell over the other mechanics. Aaron carefully set his wrench down and turned, wiping his hands on a shop rag. Ethan stood with his usual crew, Mike Stevens, Tommy Reeves, and two others Aaron didn't know by name. All of them wore leather jackets despite the warm morning, their faces set in practiced sneers. "Can I help you with something?" Aaron's voice was level, professional. He was aware of Danny watching from across the garage, the younger man's face tight with concern. Ethan stepped closer, his boots leaving deliberate scuff marks on the clean floor. "Yeah, actually, my buddy Mike here needs his car looked at. But we're kind of particular about who touches our rides. Don't want any unauthorized modifications, if you know what I mean." More laughter from his crew. Aaron met Ethan's gaze steadily, noting the slight twitch in the other man's jaw. Bullies always hated it when their targets wouldn't flinch. "I'm sure one of the other mechanics would be happy to help," Aaron replied, turning back to his work. "I'm booked solid today. You refusing service? That's not very professional." Ethan's voice dropped lower, meant for Aaron's ears alone. "But then again, your kind never did understand proper customer service." The wrench in Aaron's hand suddenly felt heavier, its weight familiar in a way that had nothing to do with automotive repair. For a moment, muscle memory from another life whispered through his fingers, suggesting movements that would end this confrontation in seconds. Instead, he carefully set the tool down. "If you'll excuse me, I have work to finish." "This isn't finished," Ethan promised, his voice carrying that peculiar mix of hatred and fear that Aaron had heard too many times before. Not by a long shot. The gang's laughter and the roar of their engines faded into the morning air. Aaron felt Frank Thompson's presence before the older man spoke. "You okay, Cole?" Aaron nodded, already reaching for his wrench again. "Fine, Mr. Thompson. Just fine." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of oil changes and brake jobs. Aaron lost himself in the work, letting the familiar rhythms wash away the bitter taste of the confrontation. During lunch, he sat in his usual spot behind the garage, watching clouds drift across the sky while he ate his sandwich. Danny found him there, dropping onto the concrete beside him with the boundless energy of youth. "Those guys are real jerks, Aaron. Someone should stand up to them." "Someone probably will," Aaron replied quietly. "Eventually. But they just keep getting worse. Did you hear what they did to Marcus Taylor last week? The kid's only 15. And they chased him through the park, calling him all kinds of names. Nobody did anything, just watched." Aaron remembered. He'd seen it from across the street, the young black teenager running, terror on his face, while Ethan's gang pursued, him with whoops and jeers that belonged in another century. He'd wanted to intervene, had taken 2 steps forward before the memory of his commander's voice stopped him. "Sometimes the hardest part of the mission is knowing when to stay hidden." "Things have a way of working themselves out," Aaron said, finally, crumpling his lunch bag. "Marcus okay?" Danny nodded. "Yeah, he got away, but he doesn't walk through the park anymore. Takes the long way around." The afternoon brought more customers, more repairs, more carefully averted gazes and mumbled thanks. Aaron worked steadily, losing himself in the meditation of mechanical problems and solutions. Here, at least, everything made sense. Every problem had a fix if you just knew where to look and had the patience to do things right. It was nearly closing time when Sarah Mitchell walked in. Erin recognized her from the local paper. She'd written a piece last month about small business owners in Maple Grove, though she'd somehow missed including Thompson's garage in her survey. "I'm looking for Erin Cole," she announced to the garage at large, her notebook already in hand. The other mechanic suddenly found urgent tasks in the furthest corners of the building. Erin wiped his hands and stepped forward. "That's me." Sarah's professional smile faltered slightly as she took him in, and Erin saw the familiar calculations running behind her eyes. Surprise at his size, at the quiet authority in his bearing that years of trying to be invisible couldn't quite erase. "Ms. Mitchell," he said, letting her know he recognized her. "What can I do for you?" She recovered quickly, her smile reinforced. "I'm doing a piece on local services. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" "About cars?" "Among other things. There's been some talk about tensions in town. I'd love to get your perspective." Erin studied her for a moment. She was young, probably fresh out of journalism school, eager to make her mark with a story about small-town racism. She had no idea what she was poking at, what shadows she might disturb. "No comment," he said quietly. "But if you need your car looked at, we're open Monday through Saturday, 8 to 6. The drive home that evening felt longer than usual. Erin took the scenic route, letting the Mustang's engine sing along empty back roads as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple. His father had taught him to drive on roads like these, had shown him how to feel the car's rhythm, how to be one with the machine. The first sign of trouble was the broken glass glittering in his headlights as he turned onto his street. The second was the smell. Harsh chemical paint and something else. Something that made his combat-trained senses scream warnings. Erin pulled into his driveway and felt something inside him go very, very quiet. The Mustang's windows were shattered, its perfect paint marred by jagged lines of spray paint. Crude symbols and worse words covered the doors, the hood, even the roof. The tires were slashed, the leather seats torn and soaked with something that made them glisten in the fading light, but it was the photograph that broke him. The clear-coated picture of him and his father, carefully preserved beneath layers of polish and pride, had been deliberately scratched out, leaving only ragged strips of paper and memory. Erin stood very still, letting the magnitude of the destruction wash over him. In the distance he heard familiar laughter, Ethan and his crew, watching from the shadows, waiting for his reaction, waiting for him to explode, to give them an excuse. Instead, he walked into his house and came back with a hoe, bucket and rags. Methodically, he began to clean what he could, his movements precise and controlled. To anyone watching, he probably looked defeated, broken. They didn't see his eyes, didn't see the cold calculation there, the tactical assessment taking place, behind the quiet facade. Didn't recognize the stance of a predator choosing its moment. As darkness fell, Erin stepped back and surveyed his work. The car was still destroyed, but at least the worst of the graffiti was gone. Tomorrow he'd begin the real repairs. Tomorrow he'd start rebuilding. But tonight, in the privacy of his small house, he opened the locked box in his closet. Inside, beneath folders marked with redacted mission details and medals he never displayed, lay a photograph identical to the one that had been destroyed. Erin placed it carefully on his mantel, next to his father's service photo. His fingers lingered on the frame, feeling the strength in his father's smile, the pride in both their eyes as they stood beside the Mustang on the day they'd bought it. "I remember what you taught me, Dad," Erin whispered to the quiet room. "About patience, about choosing your battles." His hand clenched once, hard enough to whiten knuckles that had once broken men in half, then deliberately relaxed. In the distance, an engine revved, Ethan's crew making another pass by his house, their laughter carrying on the night air. Erin didn't move, didn't react, but something shifted in his stance. A minute change that would have made his old teammates step back in recognition. The quiet man was starting to wake up, and Maple Grove had no idea what that meant. Dawn broke over Thompson's garage in shades of steel gray, the morning light revealing what the darkness had hidden. Erin stood motionless in the parking lot, taking in the crude messages sprayed across the building's brick walls. "Get out," competed for space with racial slurs and badly drawn symbols of hate. Frank Thompson's face was thunderous as he pulled up in his pickup. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, climbing out and walking to stand beside Aaron. "You call the police?" "No point," Aaron replied quietly. He was already rolling up his sleeves, eyes scanning the wall as he calculated how much paint it would take to cover everything. "Sheriff made his position clear yesterday." Frank ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Take what you need from the supply room. Paint, cleaning supplies, whatever. This comes off before we open." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "Look, Cole, if you need some time off, I need to work." Aaron was already walking toward the supply room, his stride purposeful. "But thanks, Mr. Thompson." The morning passed in a blur of scrubbing and painting. Danny showed up an hour early and wordlessly grabbed a brush, working alongside Aaron despite the older man's protests. Other mechanics arrived, some averting their eyes, others mumbling. Awkward greetings before hurrying inside. "You know who did this, right?" Danny's voice was low as they worked on a particularly stubborn section. "Same guys who trashed your car." Aaron's brushstrokes remained steady. "Knowing and proving are different things. But some battles aren't worth fighting, Danny. Not the way people expect." The words triggered a memory, sudden and sharp as broken glass. Aaron was back in that jungle clearing, his team pinned down by heavy fire. The enemy had numbers and superior position. They were expecting a frontal assault, waiting for the Americans to charge in with guns blazing. Instead, Aaron had led his team on a 3-hour detour through snake-infested swamp, coming up behind the enemy position when the sun was directly in their eyes. "Aaron, you okay?" Danny's voice snapped him back to the present. "You kind of zoned out there." "I'm fine." Aaron dipped his brush in more paint. "Just remembering something." They finished just as the first customers began arriving. Aaron changed into his spare work clothes and buried himself in repairs, letting the familiar rhythm of tools and engines wash away the morning's bitterness. But he couldn't quite shake the growing weight of eyes on him, customers watching him work, wondering if their cars were safe with him, whispering when they thought he couldn't hear. Around noon, a sleek black sedan pulled into the lot. The man who stepped out wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Aaron made in 3 months. His shoes gleamed despite the dusty parking lot, and his sunglasses reflected the world in perfect mirror images. Aaron felt the shift in his own stance before he could stop it. Weight balanced, hands relaxed but ready, eyes marking potential. Cover. Old habits? The phantom, I presume. The man's voice was cultured, precise. He approached with the measured stride of someone used to dangerous situations, stopping just outside arm's reach. Aaron's expression didn't change, but something, cold and familiar, stirred in his chest. No one had called him that name in 2 years. "You're a long way from Virginia. Walk with me?" The man gestured toward the street. Not a request. Aaron glanced at the waiting cars, then at Frank's office. His boss nodded slightly. "Take care of whatever this is." They walked in silence for half a block before the man spoke again. "Your old unit sends their regards. They miss your particular skill set. I'm done with that life. Are you?" The man's smile was razor thin. "Because our intelligence suggests you're in a situation that might benefit from those skills." Aaron stopped walking. "You're watching me. We watch all our investments, especially the valuable ones." The man studied Aaron's face. "These locals, they have no idea what they're poking, do they? No concept of the training, the experience, the body count. That's not who I am anymore. No." The man reached into his jacket slowly, telegraphing the movement. He withdrew a phone, tapped the screen, and held it up. "Security camera footage from 2 nights ago. The Walsh boy and his friends destroying your car. We could make things difficult for them." Aaron's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Stay out of it. You earned your reputation, Phantom. Youngest team leader in your unit's history. Highest success rate for high-risk extractions. The mission in Tehran alone. We're done here." Aaron turned away. "The offer stands." The man called after him. "When you're ready to be who you really are again, call the number I just sent to your phone." Aaron walked back to the garage, his mind churning with unwanted memories. The weight of his phone in his pocket felt like a live grenade. The afternoon brought Sarah Mitchell back, this time with pointed questions about the graffiti. Aaron gave her the same answer as before, no comment, but she persisted. The people have a right to know what's happening in their town, she argued, following him as he moved between repairs. These hate crimes, they're not crimes if, no one enforces the law, Aaron replied, his voice flat. And stories don't help if no one wants to read them. Then help me make them want to read. Sarah's eyes were earnest. Help me show them the truth. Aaron paused in his work, studying her. Truth is dangerous, Ms. Mitchell. You might not like what you find. Try me. Before Aaron could respond, familiar engines roared in the parking lot. Ethan's crew had arrived, their modified cars taking up multiple spaces. Well, look who it is. Ethan's voice carried across the garage. The silent mechanic and the nosy reporter. Perfect couple, if you ask me. Aaron positioned himself between Sarah and the approaching gang, his movements subtle but precise. She probably didn't notice how he'd also shifted to keep all 5 men in his field of vision, or how his stance would let him reach any of them in under 2 seconds. This is a place of business, Aaron said quietly. Take it somewhere else. Ethan's smile was ugly. Or what? You'll call the cops? Oh, wait. They don't much care for your kind around here, do they? You should leave. Aaron's voice had changed, carrying echoes of command that made Sarah glance at him sharply. Or maybe. Ethan took a step closer, emboldened by his friend's presence. Maybe we'll pay another visit to your place tonight. Finish what we started with that piece of junk car. The temperature in the garage seemed to drop. Aaron's hands were perfectly still at his sides, but something in his stillness made Sarah's instincts scream danger. You know what I see? Ethan continued, oblivious to the shift in atmosphere. I see a coward. A man who won't stand up for himself, won't fight back. You see what I let you see. Aaron's words were barely audible, meant for Ethan alone. Something in his tone finally registered with the younger man. Ethan's swagger faltered, confusion and the first hints of fear crossing his face. The moment stretched, balanced on a knife's edge. Then Danny dropped a wrench, the clang shattering, the tension. Ethan stepped back, trying to hide his unease with a sneer. This isn't over, he promised, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. As the gang retreated, Sarah turned to Aaron with new interest in her eyes. What was that about? For a moment there? No comment. Aaron returned to his work, but he could feel her studying him, cataloging details she'd missed before. The way he moved, the precision of his movements, the controlled power in his frame. That evening, after the garage closed, Aaron made 2 stops on his way home. The first was at a small storage unit on the edge of town, where he spent 20 minutes checking equipment he'd hoped never to use again. The second was at the cemetery, where he sat beside his father's grave as darkness fell. I tried it your way, Dad, he said softly to the gathering shadows. Tried to be invisible, to let it slide. His hands clenched in his lap. But they're not going to stop, and if they come after the kid or Sarah or anyone else, he trailed off, remembering the look in Ethan's eyes, the growing boldness of his threats. A figure emerged from the darkness behind him, the man from earlier, still immaculate in his suit despite the hour. Decision time, Phantom, the man said quietly. These people, this town, they don't understand men like us. Men who've seen what we've seen, done what we've done. Aaron didn't turn. I told you to stay out of it. And I told you we watch our investments. The man placed a file folder on the grave marker. Everything we have on Walsh and his crew. Their movements, their hideouts, their connections. Use it or don't. Your choice. Aaron waited until the man's footsteps faded before reaching for the folder. Inside, he found detailed surveillance photos, background checks, patterns of movement, everything he'd need to. He closed the folder with a sharp motion. Not yet. There were still lines he wouldn't cross, promises he'd made to himself when he left that life behind. But as he drove home in his damaged Mustang, hearing the engine's wounded rumble, Aaron couldn't shake the feeling that those lines were beginning to blur. The quiet man was awake now, and he remembered other promises too. Promises about protecting the innocent, about standing against evil in all its forms. The next morning, Danny caught him as he arrived at work. "Aaron, you need to see this." The young mechanic led him to the break room, where the local news played on the ancient TV. Sarah Mitchell was on screen, reporting about a series of racial incidents in town. Behind her, Aaron could see his father's garage. Sources suggest, "These aren't isolated incidents," Sarah was saying, "but part of a pattern of escalating harassment. The question is, how long before someone gets hurt?" Aaron watched silently, noting how she'd avoided mentioning him directly while still telling the story. Clever girl. She's right, isn't she? Danny's voice was quiet. Someone is going to get hurt. Aaron thought of the file in his trunk, of the weight of his old life pressing against his conscience. "Maybe," he said finally, "but not the people you're thinking of." He spent the morning working on his Mustang, carefully documenting each act of vandalism. Not for the police. They'd made their position clear. But for whatever came next. The quiet man in him, the one who'd led men through hell and brought them back, was making plans. The bell over the garage door chimed, and Aaron looked up to find Lucas, Ethan's right-hand man, standing awkwardly in the entrance. The younger man glanced over his shoulder before speaking. "You need to be careful," Lucas said quickly. He's not right in the head lately, talking crazy stuff, about making examples and sending messages." "Why are you telling me this?" Lucas shifted uncomfortably. "Because I saw something in you yesterday, when Ethan was running his mouth. Something that scared me more than he ever could." Aaron studied him for a long moment. "Smart man. Just whatever you're going to do. Remember, some of us were just following along. We didn't know it would go this far." After Lucas left, Aaron stood motionless beside his damaged car, letting the implications sink in. The enemy was starting to fracture, fear working its way through their ranks. In his previous life, this would have been the moment to strike, to exploit the weakness. But as he ran his hand along the Mustang's scarred paint, Aaron remembered his father's words about choosing battles, about being better than those who would drag you down to their level. The question was, could he be better and still protect those who needed protecting? Could he find a middle path between the quiet mechanic and the warrior he'd once been? The answer, he suspected, would come soon enough, and when it did, Maple Grove would learn that sometimes the most dangerous predators were the ones who chose to be peaceful, until they couldn't anymore. The crash of breaking glass jolted Aaron awake at 3 a.m. He was on his feet before the sound finished echoing, muscle memory carrying him away from the bedroom window as a brick sailed through it. Laughter drifted up from the street below, followed by the screech of tires. Aaron moved through his darkened house with practiced silence, staying away from windows. In the garage, he found the message Ethan's crew had left. Tools scattered. Across the floor, workbenches overturned and spray-painted across his tool chest. "Leave or we'll finish the job." The quiet man inside him noted entry points, angles of attack, defensive positions, habits from another life that never quite faded. But it was his father's voice he heard. The measure of a man isn't in how hard he can hit, but in how much he can take without hitting back. Dawn found him cleaning methodically, sorting salvageable tools from ruined ones. The foreign weight of the surveillance file still sat in his trunk, untouched. Not yet. Danny arrived early again, his young face hardening when he saw the destruction. "This has to stop, Aaron." "It will." Aaron's voice was quiet as he righted another workbench. One way or another. The morning sun cast long shadows through the garage doors as Aaron lost himself in repairs, letting the familiar work calm his mind. But memories kept intruding. Another time, another place, where silence and patience had meant survival. The jungle had been alive with danger, his team moving through chest-deep water as enemy patrols passed overhead on rickety bridges. They'd been outnumbered 15-1, their extraction point compromised. The men looked to him, waiting for orders, and Aaron had smiled, because this was where he thrived. When the odds were impossible, when there was no choice but to outthink, outmaneuver and overcome. Earth to Aaron? Sarah Mitchell's voice pulled him back to the present. She stood in the garage doorway, notebook in hand, concern etched on her face. You okay? You looked 1,000,000 miles away. Aaron straightened from the engine he'd been working. I'm fine. Still not commenting on your story. Actually, I'm here about something else. Sarah glanced around before lowering her voice. I've been digging into your background. That would be a mistake, would it? Because I found some interesting gaps. Your military records are sealed. Your work history before moving here is classified. And when I asked around about your old unit, people got very nervous. Aaron set his wrench down with deliberate care. Ms. Mitchell. Sarah. Some stories aren't meant to be told. She stepped closer, her eyes intense. But some stories need to be told, especially when they might help people understand what's really happening in this town. Before Aaron could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Tires squealed on pavement as one of Ethan's cars roared into the parking lot. But something was wrong. The engine sound was ragged, uneven. An elderly woman half fell out of her car in the parking lot, tears streaming down her face. Please, someone help. They ran me off the road. My grandson's still in the car. Aaron was moving before she finished speaking, crossing the distance in long strides. The woman's car sat at an angle near Thompson's garage, steam rising from its crumpled hood. In the back seat, a young black teenager, Marcus Taylor, sat frozen, his eyes wide with terror. You okay, Marcus? Aaron kept his voice calm as he checked the boy for injuries. Marcus nodded shakily. They came out of nowhere, started chasing us, yelling things. Your grandmother's fine. Car's fixable. That's what matters. Aaron helped the boy out, noting how his hands trembled. Let's get you both inside. From across the street, engines revved aggressively. Ethan's crew had parked in front of the diner watching, waiting for a reaction. I called the police, Sarah said as Aaron led Marcus and his grandmother into the garage's office. For all the good it'll do. They won't help, Marcus's grandmother said bitterly. Never do. But I know who did this. It was that Walsh boy and his friends. Been terrorizing folks for months now. Aaron got them settled with water and called a tow truck he knew wouldn't overcharge them. As he worked, he noticed Marcus studying him, with a mixture of fear and hope. Mr. Cole? The boy's voice was barely audible. What do we do? They're not going to stop. The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Aaron thought of the file in his trunk, of the man in the suit who understood what he was capable of. But looking at Marcus's face, he saw something that mattered more. A young man watching to see how an adult would handle injustice. We fix what's broken, Aaron said finally. We help where we can, and we don't let them make us into something we're not. But later, after Marcus and his grandmother had left, Aaron found himself alone in the garage with his thoughts. The quiet man was stirring, remembering other lessons, about how evil triumphed when good men did nothing, about the responsibility that came with having the skills to make a difference. He was still wrestling with these thoughts when Lucas slipped into the garage during lunch break. Ethan's right-hand man looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds. Ethan's losing it, Lucas said without preamble. After you didn't react to the garage thing, he started talking crazy. Says we need to send a bigger message. Aaron continued working on the engine in front of him, but his attention was razor sharp. What kind of message? He wants to go after the kid. Marcus says if we can't drive you out, we'll drive out everyone who looks like you. Lucas swallowed hard. I didn't sign up for this, man. Messing with cars is one thing, but kids? Why are you telling me this? Because... Lucas struggled with the words. Because I saw you handle that situation earlier. No anger, no fear, just control. Like you've dealt with way worse than Ethan. Aaron said nothing, letting the silence draw more information out. Some of the guys are talking about leaving the crew, Lucas continued. Ethan's brought in some heavy hitters from out of town, real hardcore types. They're planning something big. When? Soon. That's all I know. Lucas started to leave, then turned back. Whatever you are, whatever you used to be, I hope it's enough. Because Ethan's not going to stop until someone makes him. After Lucas left, Aaron drove to his storage unit. Inside, past the ordinary boxes and old furniture, he opened a hidden compartment in the wall. The equipment inside was meticulously maintained despite years of disuse, habits drilled into him by instructors whose names he'd never known. As he checked each item, another memory surfaced. His team was pinned down in a bombed-out building, hostiles closing in from 3 directions. The hostage they'd been sent to rescue was injured, barely conscious. Traditional tactics said to wait for air support, but that would take too long. So Aaron had improvised, using the environment and the enemy's expectations against them. A knock on the storage unit's door snapped him back to the present. He had the door locked and a weapon in hand before consciously deciding to move. "It's Sarah Mitchell," a voice called. "We need to talk." Aaron relaxed slightly but didn't lower his guard. "This is private property. And I'm a good investigator. Open up, unless you want me to start asking loud questions about why a mechanic has a storage unit registered to a shell company tied to military intelligence." He opened the door just enough to see her face. "This is dangerous ground you're walking." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Someone has to walk it. The sheriff won't help. The town looks the other way. And you have the skills to stop this, don't you? I've seen how you move, how you assess situations. You're military, special forces, probably. You need to drop this story." "No, I need to tell it right." She held up her notebook. "I've documented everything. The harassment, the attacks, the police negligence, but I'm missing the most important piece, who you really are." Aaron studied her for a long moment. "Some truths are better left buried. Like the truth about what happened in Tehran." His stillness became absolute. Sarah pressed on. "I found references to an operation there. Something that earned someone, called the Phantom, a lot of medals that don't officially exist. Ms. Mitchell, 3 days ago, Marcus Taylor's grandmother called me, said she was worried about her grandson, said Ethan's crew had been following him home from school, making threats. Today they ran them off the road. What happens when they do worse?" Aaron closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, Sarah took an involuntary step back at what she saw there. "You want the truth?" His voice was very quiet. "The truth is that I came here to forget what I used to be, to honor my father's memory by living the quiet life he wanted for me. But sometimes," he looked past her, into memories she couldn't see, "sometimes the world doesn't let you forget your skills, doesn't let you walk away. Then use those skills. Help me stop this before someone gets killed." Aaron was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Write your story, but leave out the military bits for your own safety. And Ethan, I'll handle Ethan." There was something in his voice that made Sarah shiver despite the warm day. "My way." That evening, Aaron parked his damaged Mustang in front of his house and waited. Sure enough, Ethan's crew drove by, shouting insults and threats. But this time, Aaron watched them with different eyes, noting their patterns, their habits, their weaknesses. The quiet man was fully awake now, and he had work to do. Inside, Aaron finally opened the surveillance file. The photos and documents told a story beyond simple racist harassment, connections to larger hate groups, plans for escalating violence, blueprints of potential targets, including Marcus's school. His phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Ready to be who you really are?" Aaron looked at his father's photo on the mantle, remembering their last conversation. "Being peaceful doesn't mean being weak," his father had said. "But sometimes, son, peace has to be protected, has to be fought for." He typed a single word, in response. "Ready." The quiet man smiled in the darkness, remembering other nights, Other battles. Ethan's crew thought they were predators, but they had no idea what that word truly meant. They were about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous men were the ones who chose to be peaceful, until someone forced them to be otherwise. The stage was set. The time for patience was over, and in the quiet of his home, Aaron Cole began to plan. Aaron's garage had become a workshop of a different kind. Tools that once fixed engines now served a new purpose as he methodically prepared for what was coming. A timing light became a motion sensor. Jumper cables transformed into makeshift restraints. Even the most basic tools could become tactical, advantages in the right hands. The phone call came just after sunset. Danny's voice was breathless, panicked. "Aaron, they took him. They grabbed Marcus right off the street. His grandmother's here at the garage. She's hysterical." Something cold and familiar settled over Aaron's mind. "Tell me everything." 4 guys in 2 cars. Grabbed him while he was walking home from basketball practice. "I saw it happen, but couldn't stop them." Danny's voice cracked. "This is my fault. I should have given him a ride home." "Not your fault." Aaron was already moving, muscle memory guiding his hands as he gathered equipment. "Stay with his grandmother. Call Sarah Mitchell. She needs to know what's happening, but no police, not yet." He ended the call and opened the surveillance file, spreading photos across his workbench. Ethan's crew had 3 primary locations they used for meetings. 2 were too public for what they had planned. That left the abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, isolated, multiple escape routes, perfect for intimidation. Aaron closed his eyes, letting his training take over. In his mind, he could see the warehouse layout from the surveillance photos. 2 main entrances, loading dock in the rear, high windows along the north wall. Guards would be posted outside, probably 2 men. More inside, watching their prize. Ethan would want an audience for whatever message he planned to send. The quiet man smiled in the darkness. They thought they were hunters. They had no idea what that word truly meant. The first step was gathering intelligence. Aaron drove past the warehouse in his damaged Mustang, engine rumbling loudly enough to draw attention. As expected, 2 of Ethan's crew emerged to watch him pass. Their postures, their positioning, everything told a story to trained eyes. 3 blocks away, Aaron pulled into an alley and killed the engine. From a hidden compartment under the seat, he retrieved equipment that hadn't seen use since his last mission. Night vision monocular, radio scanner, tactical tools that felt like old friends in his hands. The scanner crackled to life, picking up cheap walkie-talkie signals. Ethan's crew coordinating their watch positions. Amateur hour. "Kid secured in the back office," a voice reported. "Still unconscious from the chloroform." "Ethan says wait for his signal," another replied. "Wants to make sure our message is properly delivered." Aaron's jaw tightened. 6 hours until dawn. The chloroform would wear off soon, and then the real fear would begin for Marcus. Time was a factor, but rushing in would only get the boy killed. He thought back to a similar situation in Southeast Asia. Hostage held in a fortified compound, heavily guarded. His team had been ordered to wait for reinforcements, but the target would be moved before help arrived. So Aaron had created a plan that seemed insane until it worked, using the enemy's own security measures against them. The warehouse presented similar opportunities. Aaron began his preparations, moving with the fluid efficiency that had earned him his code name. Each step was measured, each tool carefully chosen. The quiet man was in full control now, seeing the battlefield with crystal clarity. First, he disabled their vehicles, working silently in the growing darkness. Sugar and gas tanks, brake lines carefully nicked, not enough to fail immediately, but enough to prevent pursuit. The guards never noticed his presence, too focused on watching the street. Next came the surveillance disruption. Small devices, planted near their patrol routes, designed to create confusion and uncertainty. A noise here, a shadow there. Let them wear themselves down jumping at ghosts. Aaron was rigging the final device when footsteps approached his position. He melted into the shadows, becoming part of the darkness as Lucas passed within arm's reach. "This is messed up," Lucas was saying into his phone. "The kid's just a teenager." We're supposed to be sending a message, not destroying lives. A pause, as he listened to the response. I don't care what Ethan says. This isn't what I signed up for. Another pause. Fine. But if anything happens to that kid, I'm out, and I'm not the only one. Aaron logged the information away. Dissension in the ranks could be useful, but right now, his focus was on the hostage. Marcus would be regaining consciousness soon, alone, and terrified in enemy territory. The radio scanner crackled again. Boss is here, says get ready for the show. 2 more vehicles arrived, Ethan's distinctive muscle car and a van carrying the out-of-town muscle he'd recruited. Aaron counted figures in the darkness. 12 total. More than expected, but numbers meant nothing to a ghost. He thought of his father then, of the lessons about patience and peace. But he also remembered other lessons, learned in harder schools. Sometimes peace had to be earned through decisive action. Sometimes the only way to stop violence was to demonstrate its consequences to those who wielded it carelessly. The quiet man began his work. First came the power, cut at the main box with surgical precision. The warehouse plunged into darkness, producing startled shouts and curses from inside. Emergency lights kicked in, creating pools of dim illumination that actually made the darkness deeper for untrained eyes. Check the breakers. Ethan's voice, carried clearly. And someone find the kid. Aaron moved through the shadows like liquid night, years of training expressing themselves in perfect silence. The first guard never knew what hit him. Pressure points engaged with scientific precision, unconsciousness following in seconds. The second guard had time to realize something was wrong before darkness claimed him. The third reached for his phone but found his hand wouldn't move, nerve clusters expertly manipulated. Inside, confusion was growing. Joey's not answering his radio, neither is Mike. Spread out and find them. Ethan's voice carried an edge of panic now. And someone get those lights back on. Aaron watched through his night vision as they split up, exactly as he'd planned. Divide and conquer, the oldest strategy in the book, yet still effective against undisciplined opponents. He took them down one by one, moving between targets like a ghost in the machine. Each takedown was silent, precise, designed to spread fear through the ranks. Let them feel what it was like to be hunted. Lucas was the first to break. "This isn't right," he shouted into the darkness. "Something's out there." "Shut up." Ethan's voice cracked with stress. "It's just one man. Find him." One man. Aaron's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, his whisper carrying in the darkness. "You should have done your research, Ethan. Should have asked yourself why a simple mechanic moves the way I do. Why I never showed fear." Another guard went down, pressure points singing under Aaron's touch. "What do you want?" Ethan's attempt at bravado couldn't mask his terror. The boy, unharmed. Aaron's voice moved again, impossible to track. "This is your only warning. Screw you. You want him? Come and get him." I was hoping you'd say that. The emergency lights died, plunging the warehouse into absolute darkness. In the distance, Marcus's voice cried out in fear. Aaron moved with lethal grace, through the chaos, his night vision painting the world in shades of green. The out-of-town muscle proved more challenging, but they were still amateurs playing at violence. One by one, they joined their companions in unconsciousness. Lucas made his choice when Aaron found him guarding the office door. "He's inside," the young man whispered, stepping aside. "Just don't kill anyone, please." Aaron's smile was hidden by darkness. "I don't kill Lucas, but they won't know that until they wake up." Inside the office, he found Marcus tied to a chair, tears streaming down his face. The boy's eyes widened as Aaron emerged from the shadows. "Mr. Cole, close your eyes, Marcus. Count to 10. When you open them, you'll be safe. The rescue took less than 30 seconds. By the time Marcus opened his eyes, they were outside in the cool night air. Aaron's jacket wrapped around his shoulders. But it wasn't quite over. One loose end remained. Aaron found Ethan trying to escape through the loading dock, gun shaking in his hand as he swung it at shadows. "Stop!" Ethan's voice was high, frightened. "I'll shoot!" "No." Aaron emerged into the dim light. "You won't." The gun clattered to the ground as recognition dawned on Ethan's face. How did you?" "Listen carefully," Aaron said softly. "This is your only warning. The boy is under my protection. This town is under my protection. Come near either again, and I'll show you what I learned in places your nightmares can't imagine." "You can't?" "I just did." Aaron's smile was terrible in the darkness. "The others will wake up with headaches, nothing more. But they'll remember the fear. Remember what it feels like to be hunted. Remember that some prey bites back." He left Ethan there, shaking in the darkness, and drove Marcus home. The boy's grandmother burst into tears at the sight of him, pulling him into a fierce embrace. Sarah Mitchell was there too, notebook in hand. But when she saw Aaron's face, she quietly put it away. Some stories, she realized, were better left in the shadows. Dawn found Aaron in his garage, tidying away tools that had served a different purpose for one night. Danny arrived early as usual, but his eyes were different now, filled with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. "The kids at school are saying Ethan's crew got jumped by some kind of ninja," Danny said carefully. "That someone took out 12 guys in the dark, like a ghost." Aaron continued working on an engine, his movements precise and controlled. "Sounds like quite a story." "Marcus is okay. Shaken up, but okay." Danny paused. He said his rescuer moved like a shadow, said it was almost like, "Sometimes, Danny, the best stories are the ones we don't tell." Aaron straightened up, wiping his hands. "Now, about that Chevelle you wanted to learn to restore." But word spread, as word does in small towns. Whispers about the night Ethan's crew learned fear, about the quiet mechanic who might be more than he seemed, about shadows that moved with purpose and precision. The quiet man smiled as he worked, listening to the whispers. Sometimes peace had to be protected. Sometimes the best deterrent was the knowledge that in the darkness, predators could become prey. And in Maple Grove, the night belonged to the Phantom. Maple Grove buzzed with rumors about the warehouse incident. Stories spread in whispered conversations at diners and hurried exchanges in grocery store aisles. 12 men taken down in darkness. A rescue that left no traces except unconscious bodies and shattered confidence. A shadow that moved like liquid night. Aaron listened to the whispers as he worked, noting how customers at Thompson's garage now watched him with a different kind of unease. No longer contempt or casual racism, but something closer to wary respect. Even Frank Thompson's gruff demeanor had shifted subtly, his eyes following Aaron's movements with new awareness. "Heard Ethan Walsh is recruiting," Frank said casually one morning, passing Aaron a work order. "Bringing in people from out of town. Real hard cases according to my sources." Aaron nodded, reading between the lines. Frank was trying to warn him without directly acknowledging what had happened at the warehouse. "Appreciate the heads up. Whatever's coming," Frank hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "This garage stands with you. Whole town's watching now, talking about how things need to change." Before Aaron could respond, a sleek black sedan pulled into the parking lot. The man in the suit stepped out, his perfect composure unchanged since their last meeting. "The Phantom's handiwork caused quite a stir in certain circles," the man said without preamble, following Aaron to a quiet corner of the garage. 12 men disabled without permanent injury. No evidence left behind, just like the old days. "They took a kid." Aaron's voice was flat. "Made it personal. And now Ethan Walsh is making it more personal. Our surveillance shows he's contacted several white supremacist groups in neighboring states. Real zealots, not weekend warriors like his local crew. They're gathering at a compound 20 miles outside town." Aaron continued working on the engine in front of him, but his mind was already calculating angles, approaches, contingencies. "How many?" 27 at last count. Heavy weapons, military experience. They're treating this like a war. It's not a war." Aaron's hands moved with mechanical precision as he spoke. "Wars have armies. This is pest control." The man's thin smile held genuine amusement. "Still the same Phantom. We can provide support if—" "No." Aaron's voice was sharp. "This ends here. My way." Fair enough. But take this. The man placed a small package on the workbench. Consider it a welcome back gift. Inside, Aaron found specialized equipment he hadn't seen since his active duty days, cutting-edge night vision, communications gear, and other tools of his former trade. The quiet man stirred at the sight of them, remembering other missions, other nights. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. A compound in some nameless desert, 30 hostiles with body armor and automatic weapons. His team outnumbered 5 to 1. The mission briefing had called it a potential suicide run, but Aaron had seen the fear in the hostages' eyes during surveillance, and that had been enough. By dawn, 30 men lay unconscious or restrained, and the hostages walked free. No casualties, just the legend of the phantom growing. Earth to Aaron? Danny's voice snapped him back to the present. The younger man stood nervously nearby, glancing at the departing sedan. You okay? You kind of zoned out there. I'm fine. Aaron carefully closed the package, sliding it under his workbench. How's Marcus doing? Better. Back at school. But those guys who grabbed him. Danny lowered his voice. People are saying someone really professional took them apart. Like military or something. Aaron said nothing, letting the silence do its work. The thing is, Danny continued, I've been watching you move. The way you check sightlines when you enter a room. How you always know where everyone is. Like right now, without looking, Sarah Mitchell is walking up behind me. Aaron allowed himself a small smile as Sarah stepped into view, her reporter's notebook already in hand. He's right, she said. You're not just a mechanic. What you did at the warehouse. That was Special Forces training, Navy SEALs maybe. The warehouse incident was a series of accidents and misunderstandings. Aaron's voice was calm. Nothing more. Really? Sarah's eyes were sharp. Because I talked to Lucas. He told me everything. How you moved through the darkness like it was broad daylight. How you took down trained fighters without killing anyone. He said it was like watching a force of nature. Lucas has an active imagination. Stop. Sarah's voice cracked with emotion. Stop pretending. Ethan's bringing in serious muscle. Real neo-Nazi types with military backgrounds. The whole town's terrified. We need to know. Are you really what they say you are? Aaron was silent for a long moment, remembering his father's words about choosing battles. But sometimes battles chose you. What I am, he said finally, is someone who won't let them hurt innocent people. That's all you need to know. But events were already in motion. That afternoon, 3 lifted trucks roared into the garage's parking lot, carrying men whose hard eyes and military haircuts marked them as more dangerous than Ethan's local crew. Their leader, a muscle-bound giant with a scarred face, stalked into the garage. His presence radiated violence barely contained. Looking for Aaron Cole. That's me. Aaron straightened from the engine he was working on, noting entry points and potential weapons with practiced ease. Name's Jackson. Heard you've been causing problems for our friend Ethan. The man's smile never reached his eyes. See, we got a different way of handling things. More permanent. Do you? Aaron's voice was mild, but something in his stance made several of Jackson's men step back unconsciously. Yeah, we do. Jackson leaned closer, trying to use his size advantage. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave town. Tonight. Or we start working our way through a list of people you care about. Starting with that nosy reporter, bitch. Aaron's stillness became absolute. The quiet man stirred, noting angles and distances, calculating exactly how many moves it would take to incapacitate everyone in the garage. Careful, he said softly. Threats have consequences. Jackson laughed a harsh sound. Yeah? What's one grease monkey going to do against... The movement was too fast to follow. One moment Jackson was looming over Aaron, the next he was on his knees, arm bent at an angle that made his men wince. That's a warning, Aaron said quietly. The only one you get. Threaten anyone in this town again, and I'll show you why some people still have nightmares about the Phantom. He released Jackson, stepping back as the larger man stumbled to his feet. Recognition and fear flickered in Jackson's eyes. The Phantom. That's just a story. A ghost story they tell in special forces bars. Maybe. Aaron's smile was terrifying in its gentleness. Want to find out? The garage was silent as Jackson and his men retreated, but word spread quickly through their networks. The Phantom wasn't a story. He was real, and he was protecting Maple Grove. That evening, Aaron did his own reconnaissance. The compound where Ethan's new allies gathered was well organized, with proper security protocols and patrol patterns. These weren't weekend warriors playing soldier. They were true believers with training and numbers on their side. Perfect. He watched through his night vision as they conducted weapons training, noting their formations and tactics. Good, but predictable. They fought like they'd been trained by a manual, lacking the adaptability that kept operators alive in the real world. A familiar voice spoke behind him. Quite a force they're building. Aaron didn't turn. He'd heard the man in the suit approaching 2 minutes ago. Numbers don't matter, never did. True. But they have something else. Motivation. Ideology. The kind of zealotry that makes men dangerous. No. Aaron's voice was quiet. They have fear dressed up as strength. They need numbers and weapons to feel powerful. I just need darkness and time. He thought of another night, another mission. His team pinned down in a mountain pass, enemies above and below. The smart move was to withdraw, to live and fight another day. But there were children in the compound ahead, and dawn would bring executions. So Aaron had done the impossible, using the terrain and his enemies' overconfidence against them. Sir? Danny's voice crackled through the radio hidden in Aaron's collar. The kid was parked 2 miles away, watching the compound's main road. More trucks coming in. Big ones. Aaron counted through his scope. 4 new vehicles, at least 20 more men. The compound was filling up nicely. They're planning something big, the man in the suit observed. Our intelligence suggests a coordinated attack. Multiple targets across town. They want to make examples. No. Aaron rose from his observation post, moving like a shadow through the underbrush. They want to make martyrs. Create the kind of incident that draws national attention. Start a movement. And you're going to stop them alone? I'm going to teach them the difference between soldiers and warriors. Aaron's voice held absolute certainty. Tonight. He spent the afternoon preparing, his movements precise and economical as he checked equipment and reviewed plans. The quiet man was fully in control now, seeing the battlefield with crystal clarity. Sarah found him at the garage just before sunset. Aaron, please, let me help. I can call contacts in the media, get attention on what's happening here. No, he continued his preparations without looking up. Attention is what they want, a spotlight to perform under. I'm going to give them darkness instead. At least tell me what you're planning, for the record. Aaron finally met her eyes. Some stories are better left untold, Sarah, for everyone's safety. But she persisted, following him as he moved through the garage. The people need to know, need to understand what's really happening in their town. They'll understand soon enough. Aaron's voice softened slightly. But right now, I need you to do something more important. Marcus and his grandmother. Get them somewhere safe. And Danny. I'm not hiding, Danny said from the doorway. I want to help. You will. Aaron handed him a radio. Watch the town. If anyone makes a move against civilians, call it in, but stay hidden, no heroics. Full dark brought reports of movement at the compound. Vehicles leaving in groups of 2 and 3 heading toward predetermined targets. Aaron watched through his scope as the exodus continued, exactly as he'd expected. Time to go to work. He moved through the compound like a ghost, disabling vehicles and transforming ordinary objects into improvised deterrents. Here, a tripwire, made from mechanics wire. There, a pressure plate from spare parts, simple tools repurposed by expert hands. The quiet man smiled in the darkness. Let them focus on their grand plans. He would be the chaos in their order, the shadow in their certainty. When the first group returned to report trouble in town, Danny's false sightings of police activity had worked perfectly. They found Their compound transformed into a maze of uncertainty. Emergency lights created more shadows than illumination. Every corner held potential threats. Aaron moved among them like death's quiet cousin, striking and vanishing before they could respond. Their training worked against them now. They bunched up, seeking safety in numbers, making themselves easier. Targets. He's out there. The cry went up as another fighter disappeared into the darkness. The Phantom's here. Some broke and ran. Others fired blindly into shadows, their shots only revealing their positions. Veterans recognized the tactics being used against them and tried to organize a response. But Aaron was already 3 moves. Ahead, he found Ethan in the command center, surrounded by his new allies. Their faces were pale with fear as reports of disappearances kept coming in. "It's impossible," Jackson was saying. "No one can move that fast, take down that many men. The Phantom can." The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "I tried to warn you, tried to give you a chance to walk away." Chaos erupted as the lights died. When they came back up 30 seconds later, 3 more men were down. Aaron stood in their midst, his stillness more threatening than any movement. "Last chance," he said quietly. "Leave Maple Grove. Never return. Or I show you what I learned, in places that make your worst nightmares look like summer camp." Jackson raised his weapon, but Aaron was already moving. The big man went down hard, his own momentum used against him. Others tried to react, but Aaron flowed through their attacks like water through rocks. When it was over, only Ethan remained conscious, backed into a corner with terror in his eyes. "Please," he whispered. We didn't know. We didn't know what you were. Now you do." Aaron's voice was very soft. "Spread the word. This town is under my protection. Anyone who threatens its people answers to the Phantom." He left them there, zip-tied and terrified in their own compound. By dawn, most of Ethan's out-of-town muscle had fled, carrying stories that would become legends in certain circles. Stories about a shadow that moved like liquid night, about a warrior who could defeat armies without killing, about the Phantom of Maple Grove. Aaron drove home as the sun rose, his father's voice echoing in his memory. "Sometimes the best way to keep peace is to show them why they should fear war." The quiet man smiled as he parked his Mustang. Sometimes peace had to be protected, sometimes shadows had to serve the light. And in Maple Grove, the dawn belonged to the Phantom. The bail hearing was a mere formality. Despite multiple witness statements about the warehouse incident and the compound confrontation, most charges against Ethan Walsh were deemed circumstantial. The sheriff's dismissive attitude remained unchanged, even as he signed the release papers. Aaron watched from his Mustang across the street as Ethan emerged from the county courthouse. The young man's swagger was gone, replaced by darting glances and nervous tics. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, and he nearly jumped out of his skin when a car backfired nearby. "He's broken," the man in the suit observed from the passenger seat. "Your tactics were effective." "Broken men are dangerous," Aaron replied quietly. "They have nothing left to lose." He thought of another mission, another target who'd seemed defeated. The man had appeared completely subdued during surveillance, right up until he triggered the explosives that killed 3 civilians. The lesson had stayed with Aaron. Desperation made people unpredictable. "Our intelligence suggests most of his out-of-town support has evaporated," the suit continued. "The Phantom's reputation is spreading through certain circles. Even the true believers are hesitant to challenge you now." Most isn't all. Aaron started the Mustang's engine, and reputation only matters to the rational ones. The garage was quieter these days. Word had spread about what happened at the compound, growing with each retelling. Customers spoke in hushed tones around Aaron, their eyes following his movements with a mixture of fear and respect. Even Frank Thompson's gruff demeanor had softened into something approaching reverence. Danny was waiting when Aaron pulled in, his young face troubled. "Sarah's been asking questions again. About what really happened that night. She's got sources. In the military, people who know about the Phantom. Let her ask." Aaron began his morning routine, checking tools with mechanical precision. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. But Sarah Mitchell was not so easily deterred. She arrived mid-morning, her reporter's notebook already in hand. We need to talk about what's coming. Aaron continued working on the transmission in front of him. Nothing's coming. Really? Sarah's voice was sharp. Because my sources say Ethan's been making calls, reaching out to some really dangerous people. The kind who don't care about your reputation because they think they have nothing to lose. That made Aaron look up. What kind of people? The kind who believe in racial holy war, who want to make Maple Grove a symbol for their cause. Sarah's hands tightened on her notebook. They're calling you a race traitor now, saying you need to be made an example of. Let them come. Aaron's voice was very quiet. They'll learn what the others learned. This isn't just about you anymore. Sarah's frustration boiled over. The whole town is watching, waiting to see if things really can change, if one man can make a difference. Aaron studied her for a long moment, seeing the passion in her eyes, the determination to tell a story that mattered. Some differences come at a price, Sarah. Are you sure you want to pay it? Whatever it costs, the truth needs to be told. But truth had a way of drawing predators. That evening, as Sarah walked to her car after a late meeting with sources, shadows detached themselves from the darkness. She had time for one startled cry before a chemical-soaked rag covered her mouth. Aaron got the call 20 minutes later. Ethan's voice was high, almost manic. Got your little reporter friend here. Not so brave now, is she? The quiet man stirred, combat instincts cataloging background sounds. Cars on a highway, wind through metal, the old steel mill abandoned years ago. She's alive, Ethan continued. For now. But that changes if I see any cops. Or if you try any of your special forces bullshit. What do you want? I want the big man himself, the famous phantom. Come face me like a man, not some shadow in the dark. Ethan's laugh was edged with hysteria. 1 hour, come alone or she dies. The line went dead. Aaron stood very still, letting tactical assessments flow through his mind. The steel mill had multiple buildings, dozens of potential hiding places. Ethan would have help, local muscle. Maybe other desperate men with nothing to lose. Perfect terrain for a ghost. The man in the suit materialized from the shadows. We can have a tactical team here in 30 minutes. No. Aaron was already moving toward his storage unit. This ends tonight. My way. He'll be expecting your usual tactics. The darkness. The fear. I'm counting on it. The storage unit looked different in the evening light. Aaron moved past the ordinary boxes to the hidden compartment, retrieving equipment with practiced ease. But this time he left most of it behind, taking only the essentials. Tonight wasn't about fancy gear or tactical advantage. Tonight was about ending things. Danny was waiting at the garage when Aaron pulled up. I heard about Sarah. Let me help. You are helping. Aaron handed him a radio. Watch the mill's perimeter. If anyone tries to leave or enter, I need to know. But, Danny. Aaron's voice softened slightly. Sometimes the bravest thing is knowing when to stand back, when to trust others to do what they're trained to do. The drive to the steel mill gave Aaron time to think, to remember other missions where hostages' lives hung in the balance. The quiet man stirred, recalling lessons learned in blood and darkness. The mill loomed against the night sky, a maze of rusted metal and broken dreams. Aaron parked the Mustang openly, letting its engines rumble announce his arrival. Let them think him overconfident or desperate. Let them think whatever they wanted. Ethan's voice echoed through the empty buildings. Inside the main foundry. No weapons. Aaron walked forward, hands visible at his sides. His boots crunched on broken glass and gravel, the sound carrying in the still air. Every step measured, every movement deliberate. The foundry's interior was a cathedral of rust and shadow. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, creating patterns of light and darkness that would have been tactically useful in another situation. But tonight wasn't about tactics. Ethan stood on a raised platform, holding Sarah at gunpoint. 4 other men spread around the space, each carrying weapons that shook slightly in their hands. Even in the dim light, Aaron could see the fear in their eyes. "That's far enough." Ethan's voice cracked with strain. "The mighty phantom. Not so scary in the light, are you?" Aaron kept walking, his pace unhurried. "Last chance, Ethan. Let her go." "Or what? You'll use your special forces tricks? Your ghost tactics?" Ethan's laugh was brittle. "No more shadows to hide in, tough guy. No more playing boogeyman. You still don't understand." Aaron's voice was very soft. "The shadows were never about hiding." "Shut up." Ethan pressed the gun harder against Sarah's temple. "I'm in charge now. Me." "The shadows," Aaron continued as if Ethan hadn't spoken, "were a courtesy. A chance for you to walk away. To learn from fear what you couldn't learn from reason." He stopped in the center of the foundry, moonlight painting his features in silver and shadow. His stillness was absolute. The kind of stillness that combat veterans recognized. The pause before the storm. But you chose this instead. Chose to make it personal. Aaron's eyes met Sarah's. "Close your eyes." She did. Immediately. In that moment of trust, everything happened at once. Aaron moved like liquid lightning, covering the distance to the platform in 2 heartbeats. Ethan's gun hand was already rising, tracking the movement, but Aaron had started his dodge before the wah. Trigger pulled. The shot echoed through the foundry as Sarah dropped and rolled, exactly as Aaron had known she would. The other gunmen opened fire, their shots wild with panic. But Aaron was never where their bullets went, flowing through their barrage like water through rocks. Each movement was economical, precise, aimed not at escape but at reaching his targets. The first gunman went down to a strike he never saw coming, pressure points singing under expert fingers. The second managed to turn before darkness claimed him. The third emptied his weapon at shadows while Aaron took him from behind. "Monster!" Ethan screamed, firing wildly. "What are you?" "I tried to be peaceful." Aaron's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "Tried to live quietly, to honor my father's memory, but you couldn't let it be." The last gunman broke and ran. They heard his screams cut off abruptly in the darkness outside. "Danny," Aaron spoke into his hidden radio. "One headed your way. Handle him." "Already did," Danny's voice crackled back. "Just like you showed me. Pressure points on the neck. He's taking a nap." Now it was just Ethan, his gun clicking on, empty as he spun in desperate circles. "Stay back! I'll kill her!" "No." Aaron emerged from the shadows behind him. "You won't." The disarm was textbook perfection, the kind of move Aaron had taught to SEAL candidates a lifetime ago. Ethan's wrist broke with a sharp crack, his scream echoing through the foundry. "Please," he whimpered as Aaron stood over him. "Don't kill me." "I don't kill." Aaron's voice was very quiet. "Never have. Every person I've put down got back up eventually. They just learned to make better choices." Sarah was already on her feet, phone in hand. "The police are on their way. Real police. Not the sheriff, state authorities." "Good." Aaron zip-tied Ethan's hands. "They'll find plenty of evidence. Weapons, conspiracy charges, enough to put him away for a long time." "And the others?" Sarah brushed dust from her clothes. "The ones who ran after the compound? They'll spread the word. About what happens when hate comes to Maple Grove. About the shadow that watches over it." But Ethan wasn't finished. Even with broken wrist and restrained hands, hatred gave him strength for one last act of defiance. "You think this changes anything? There'll be others. Always others. You can't watch forever." "No," Aaron agreed. "But I can teach the lesson so well that others will think twice. Will remember the story of what happened when they pushed too far." He knelt beside Ethan, voice dropping to a whisper. "Want to know the real secret of the Phantom?" Despite himself, Ethan leaned closer. "The secret is, I'm not special. I'm just a man who learned that evil only triumphs when good men do nothing. A man who decided to do something." Aaron's smile was terrible, in its gentleness. "Remember that in prison, Ethan. Remember that anyone could be like me. Anyone could be watching from the shadows." Police sirens wailed in the distance as state authorities converged on the mill. Aaron melted into the darkness, leaving Sarah to handle the official story. She would tell what needed to be told, he knew. Would help the town understand without revealing too much. Danny was waiting by the Mustang, practically vibrating with excitement. "That was amazing. The way you moved, the way you took them down without killing anyone." "The real victory," Aaron said quietly, "isn't in winning the fight. It's in teaching them why they shouldn't want to fight at all." The next morning, Maple Grove woke to headlines about Ethan Walsh's arrest. Sarah's story was a masterpiece of implications and carefully worded descriptions, painting a picture of justice served without revealing all of Aaron's secrets. The garage was busy with customers who suddenly needed urgent repairs, or perhaps just wanted to be near the man who had become their protector. Aaron worked steadily, letting the familiar rhythms of engines and tools bring him peace. Frank Thompson found him under a car late in the afternoon. "Quite a night from what I hear." "Just a quiet mechanic doing his job," Aaron replied, sliding out to reach for a wrench. "Right." Frank's smile was knowing. "Well, this quiet mechanic's made a difference. Town feels different today. Like people finally remember how to stand up straight." Aaron thought about that as he drove home that evening. The sun was setting over Maple Grove, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Here and there, he saw small changes. People of different races walking together, children playing without fear, a community remembering how to be whole. His father would have understood, he thought, would have seen that sometimes peace needed guardians. Sometimes the shadow had to serve the light. The quiet man smiled as darkness fell. In the end, it wasn't about being a legend or a ghost. It was about showing people they had the power to change things. That one person standing up could inspire others to stand, and in Maple Grove, that lesson would echo for generations to come. The community center buzzed with nervous energy. Folding chairs filled the old basketball court, arranged in neat rows, that quickly dissolved into clusters as people gravitated toward familiar faces. The racial divide was still visible, whites on one side, blacks on the other. But the line was blurring. Here and there, people crossed the invisible boundary, exchanging tentative greetings. Aaron watched from the shadows of the doorway, noting faces and positions with ingrained tactical precision. The mayor stood at the podium, shuffling papers and looking uncomfortable. Sarah Mitchell sat in the front row, her reporter's notebook, ready. Danny hovered near the middle, trying to bridge both worlds. "This town hall meeting will come to order," the mayor announced, his voice echoing in the packed space. "We're here to discuss recent events and changes in our community." Recent events. Such a mild term for what had happened. The warehouse incident, the compound confrontation, the steel mill showdown. Each story had grown in the telling, becoming something between legend and cautionary tale. "Ethan Walsh's arrest has opened a lot of eyes," the mayor continued. "Made us look hard at patterns we've ignored too long. The state investigation into our sheriff's department has revealed systemic issues that must be addressed." Aaron watched. Faces in the crowd. Some showed shame, others defiance. A few, mostly older residents, looked thoughtful, as if remembering other times, other chances at change that had slipped away. Marcus Taylor sat with his grandmother in the second row, his young face serious as he took notes. The boy had changed since his rescue, carrying himself with new confidence. He'd started a student group at school, organizing discussions about racial justice and community healing. "The floor is open for comments," the mayor said, stepping back from the podium. "Who would like to begin?" The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken words. Then Howard Bennett, the man who used to avoid Aaron's waves, stood slowly. "I've lived here 40 years, he said, voice wavering slightly. "Always thought I was one of the good ones because I didn't say certain words, didn't join certain groups. But when that Walsh boy and his crew were terrorizing our neighbors, I looked away. Told myself it wasn't my business." He paused, gathering courage. "I was wrong. We were all wrong." The admission broke something in the room. Hands rose, voices carried. Years of silence cracked open like spring ice, releasing long-buried truths. "My grandfather helped build this town," an elderly black woman said, her dignity like armor. "Worked the steel mill 60 hours a week, but his name isn't on any plaques, any memorials. Like we weren't part of this place's story. We let fear rule us," another resident added. "Fear of change, fear of difference, until someone showed us what real courage looks like." Sarah's pen moved steadily across her notebook, capturing every word. She'd won awards for her coverage of Maple Grove's transformation, though her stories never directly named Aaron or revealed his past. Some truths, she'd learned, were better left in the shadows. The meeting continued for hours, pain and hope mixing in equal measure. Plans were made, a community review board for police oversight, education initiatives, economic development programs for underserved areas. Small steps toward larger change. Aaron slipped away before anyone could call on him to speak. His work was in actions, not words. The garage was quiet when he arrived the next morning, but something had changed. The Thompsons' garage sign had been modified overnight, restored and repainted, with "and Cole" added in matching letters. Frank Thompson stood in the doorway, watching Aaron's reaction. "About time, don't you think? Place is as much yours as mine now." Aaron ran his fingers over the fresh paint. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Frank's gruff voice held unexpected emotion. "What you did for this town. Some debts can't be repaid, but we can try to do better. Be better." Inside, Aaron found his workbench covered with tokens of appreciation, plates of home-cooked food, thank you cards, small gifts. Marcus's grandmother's peach cobbler sat prominently in front, still warm. "Town's been dropping them off all morning," Danny said, emerging from the office. "By the way, did you see this?" He held up a letter from the Marines, Danny's acceptance into officer candidate school. "They said your recommendation helped," the younger man continued. "Though I notice you didn't mention anything about being a SEAL commander." "Past is past," Aaron replied, but pride colored his voice. "You'll make your own way." The morning passed in a blur of routine repairs and quiet conversations. Customers lingered longer now, sharing stories and seeking advice. The garage had become more than a business. It was a gathering place, neutral ground where the community could come together. Sarah arrived around noon, her press pass still hanging around her neck from covering the town hall meeting. "Just got word," she said without preamble. "Ethan Walsh took a plea deal. 15 years minimum, plus testimony against his out-of-town contacts. The FBI's investigating the whole network now." Aaron nodded, continuing his work on a transmission. "Good." Lucas testified too, told them everything about the gang's operations. Sarah watched Aaron's precise movements. "He's entering a rehabilitation program, trying to make amends." "People can change," Aaron said quietly, "if they want to." Speaking of change, Sarah pulled out her notebook. "I'm writing a follow-up piece about how one person standing up can transform a community. Not about the phantom," she added quickly, "but about the ripples of courage, how Marcus started his student group, how Danny's heading to OCS, how Howard Bennett is organizing community dialogue sessions." Aaron was silent for a long moment, remembering his father's words about choosing battles. That's the story that needs telling, not about one man, but about all of us. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. The man in the suit arrived in his usual black sedan, but this time he carried a small wooden box. "Your old unit sends their regards," he said, placing the box on Aaron's workbench, "and their thanks. What you did here, it's having wider effects. Other communities are standing up, fighting back against hate. The Phantom's legend is inspiring people." Inside the box, Aaron found his Navy Cross, the medal he'd never claimed after his last mission. Along with it was a short note. Some ghosts serve the light, but it was the other item that caught his attention, a frayed photograph of his father in his mechanic's uniform, standing proud beside a much younger Aaron. The image that had been destroyed on his Mustang. "How did you—" "We have our resources." The man's thin smile held genuine respect. Consider it a thank you for showing us that sometimes the quietest warriors make the biggest difference. After he left, Aaron worked late into the evening, losing himself in the meditation of engines and tools. The garage felt different now, not just a workplace, but a sanctuary. A place where change began. Danny found him there as darkness fell. You know, people are still telling stories about what happened, about the shadow that moves like liquid night, the ghost who protects Maple Grove. Let them tell stories, Aaron replied, wiping his hands. Sometimes stories are how we learn to be better. The drive home took him past familiar landmarks transformed by recent events. The warehouse where he'd rescued Marcus, now being converted into a community center. The steel mill where he'd faced Ethan, scheduled for renovation into affordable housing. The park where Marcus had once fled in terror, now filled with children of all races playing together. Small changes, but meaningful ones, like stones dropped in still water, creating ripples that touched distant shores. At home, Aaron placed the Navy Cross beside his father's photo on the mantel. The quiet man stirred, remembering other battles, other victories. But this one felt different. This wasn't about combat skills or tactical superiority. It was about showing people their own strength. The next morning brought more changes. The local paper's headline announced the sheriff's resignation and the appointment of a reform-minded successor. Sarah's article about community transformation ran alongside it, telling the story of a town learning to face its shadows and emerge stronger. Marcus stopped by the garage before school, proudly wearing his student leadership pin. We're organizing a history project, he told Aaron, collecting stories from Black residents about their contributions to Maple Grove, making sure they're not forgotten anymore. Good work. Aaron's approval made the boy stand taller. Your grandmother would be proud. She is. Says things are different now. People look each other in the eye on the street, talk to their neighbors. Marcus hesitated. It's because of you, isn't it? What you did. No. Aaron's voice was gentle but firm. It's because people finally decided to do what was right. I just reminded them they could. The day brought a steady stream of customers and well-wishers. Howard Bennett came for an oil change and stayed for an hour, sharing stories about the town's history, the good and the bad. A group of elderly Black women brought lunch, filling the garage with laughter and the smell of home cooking. Frank Thompson watched it all with quiet satisfaction. You know, he said during a quiet moment, my father owned this garage during segregation. Used to turn away Black customers, said it was just business. Wish he could see it now. He can, Aaron replied. Through you. The afternoon light slanted through the garage doors as Aaron worked on his Mustang. The car bore scars from Ethan's attack, but they were healing, like the town itself. Each repair was a reminder of resilience, of the strength found in rebuilding. Sarah's final article appeared online that evening. She'd captured the essence of Maple Grove's transformation without revealing its catalyst, telling a story of community courage and collective change. The comments section filled with messages from other towns facing similar challenges, asking how they could create their own transformation. Danny read them aloud as Aaron cleaned his tools. People are inspired, Aaron. They want to know how to stand up to hate in their own communities. Tell them the truth, Aaron said quietly. That it starts with one person refusing to look away. One person choosing to act instead of watching. The rest follows naturally. As darkness fell, Aaron drove his Mustang through town, watching lights come on in windows. The quiet man stirred, but differently now, not searching for threats, but seeing protection in the community itself, in people who had learned to stand together, to face darkness with collective courage. His father's voice seemed to whisper on the evening breeze. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't in winning the fight, but in teaching others to fight for themselves. Aaron smiled as he drove, the Mustang's engine rumbling contentedly. The shadows still held secrets, still concealed a warrior ready to defend his community. But now they held something more, the promise of continued change, of a town learning to be its own light in the darkness, And in Maple Grove, that light grew stronger every day. Spring brought change to Thompson and Cole garage. The old brick walls gleamed with fresh paint, and the newly expanded workspace hummed with activity. But the most significant changes weren't physical. They were in the faces of the young people gathered around Aaron as he leaned over an engine block. The key to restoration, he explained, pointing to various components, is understanding how everything connects. One broken piece affects the whole system, just like a community. His students nodded, taking notes. The garage's youth training program had started small, just Marcus Taylor and a few friends interested in auto repair. Now it had grown into something larger, attracting teenagers from all backgrounds who wanted to learn more than just mechanics. Danny watched from the office doorway, home on leave from officer candidate school. His uniform was crisp, his bearing already showing the influence of military training. But his eyes held the same admiration for Aaron they'd always had. "You're good with them," Danny said later as the students filed out. "Like you were with your SEAL teams." Aaron continued cleaning his tools, but a small smile played at his corners of his mouth. Different kind of training. Same principles. Build trust, show respect, lead by example. The quiet man had found a new purpose in teaching. The skills that once made him a legendary warrior now helped him shape young minds, showing them alternatives to the path Ethan Walsh had chosen. Sarah Mitchell arrived as the day's last customer was leaving. She'd won a national award for her coverage of Maple Grove's transformation, and larger papers had tried to hire her away. But she stayed, understanding that some stories needed to be told from the inside. "Got something you should see," she said, placing a letter on Aaron's workbench. It was postmarked from the state penitentiary. Aaron recognized Ethan's handwriting immediately. He read in silence, his expression unchanging, then passed the letter to Sarah. "Dear Mr. Cole," she read aloud, "I've had a lot of time to think in here about hate and fear and the kind of man I wanted to be versus the kind of man I became. The therapist says writing letters is part of the healing process, but that's not why I'm writing. I'm writing because I need you to know something. That night at the steel mill, when you could have killed me but didn't, that changed everything. You showed me there was another way. A better way. I can't undo what I did, but I can try to be better. The prison has a racial reconciliation program. I'm not just participating, I'm helping run it. Other inmates call me soft now, but I don't care. I finally understand what my hatred cost me, cost everyone. I know I have no right to ask forgiveness. That's not what this letter is about. It's about telling you that even the darkest hearts can change if someone shows them the way. You did that for me, whether you meant to or not. Thanks, you, Ethan Walsh." Silence filled the garage after Sarah finished reading. Finally, Aaron spoke. "File that one in your collection?" Sarah nodded. The collection was her ongoing documentation of Maple Grove's change. Letters, interviews, photographs. She was building an archive, ensuring that future generations would understand how their community had transformed. "There's more," she said. "Lucas is being released next month. Early parole for good behavior and cooperation. He's already lined up a job with a rehabilitation program, counseling other former gang members." The afternoon light slanted through the garage windows as Aaron worked on his Mustang. The car was fully restored now, its cherry red paint gleaming, but he'd kept one small reminder of darker times, a single scratch near the gas cap, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Some scars needed to remain, marking the distance traveled. A familiar black sedan pulled into the lot. The man in the suit stepped out, carrying a thick folder. "Your influence is spreading," he said without preamble. "Other communities are following. Maple Grove's example, standing up to hate groups, organizing youth programs, building bridges. Good." Aaron continued working on the Mustang. "There's more." The man placed the folder on a nearby workbench. "Remember those contacts Ethan gave up? Led to some interesting places. High-level arrests, policy changes, real reform." The quiet ripples. Aaron murmured, "Exactly." The man's thin smile held respect. "Your old unit sends congratulations. Said you always did understand that the most important victories happen in silence. After he left, Danny helped Aaron close up the garage. The evening air was warm, carrying the promise of summer. Got my first command assignment, Danny said, his voice trying to stay casual. Small unit, specialized training. They said my recommendation letter was impressive. Aaron smiled slightly. You'll do fine. Because I had a good teacher. Danny hesitated. They asked about you, the instructors. Said there were stories about the Phantom that didn't make it into official records. About a warrior who could win battles without taking lives, who taught others to do the same. Stories grow in the telling. Maybe. But some stories need to grow, need to spread. Danny's eyes were earnest. What you did here, what you taught us, it matters beyond Maple Grove. As if to prove his point, a group of teenagers rode past on bikes, laughing and calling greetings. Black and white together, their easy friendship a stark contrast to the tension that had once filled these streets. Into the next morning brought more changes. Marcus Taylor arrived early, wearing a student body president campaign button. His grandmother's peach cobbler sat proudly on Aaron's workbench. The history project is going amazing, Marcus reported as he helped Aaron set up for the day's training session. We've collected over 50 interviews, stories about Black families who helped build this town, who kept going despite everything. We're making sure they're not forgotten anymore. Good work. Aaron's approval made the boy stand straighter. Your father would be proud. Yeah. Marcus touched the button on his chest. That's why I'm running for president. Someone has to keep the change going, right? The morning's training session was larger than usual. Word had spread about the garage's program, drawing young people from neighboring towns. Aaron watched them work together, sharing tools and knowledge without regard for color or background. Sarah documented it all, her camera capturing moments of connection and growth. But her best photos weren't of the big moments. They were of small ones. A white teenager helping a Black friend diagnose an engine problem. A former gang member teaching automotive basics to kids he once would have terrorized. The quiet triumph of ordinary people choosing to be better. Around noon, Howard Bennett arrived with lunch for everyone, his wife's famous fried chicken and potato salad. The gesture would have been unthinkable a year ago. Now it was just another thread in the community's new fabric. Place feels different, Howard observed, watching the young people eat and laugh together. Whole town does. Like we finally woke up from a long, bad dream. Aaron nodded, thinking of his father's words about peace and patience. The old man had been right. Change was possible if you showed people a better way. The afternoon brought a surprise visit from Frank Thompson's son, home from college where he was studying social justice and community development. Dad told me everything, he said, watching Aaron work. About what you did, what you taught us all. He paused. I'm doing my thesis on Maple Grove, on how communities can transform themselves. Would you be willing to talk about it? Aaron considered for a long moment. Not about me, but about the town, about how people found their courage. That story needs telling. As evening approached, Aaron received another visitor. Lucas stood nervously in the garage doorway, thinner and paler from his time in prison, but his eyes were clear. Just wanted to say thanks, he said quietly, for showing us another way, for proving that change is possible. He held out a hand. The program I'm working with, helping other guys get out of the life, we're making a difference. Small steps, but still. Aaron shook his hand firmly. Keep going, one step at a time. The day's last task was helping Danny load his car for the return to OCS. The younger man was quiet, lost in thought. What you started here, Danny said finally. It's not going to end, is it? Even after you're gone someday, the change will continue. That was always the point. Aaron's voice was soft, not to be a hero or a legend, but to show people their own strength, their own capacity for good. As darkness fell, Aaron drove his Mustang through town. The streets had changed, not just physically, but in spirit. People walked without fear, greeting neighbors across old dividing lines. The park where Marcus had once fled in terror now hosted community events and youth programs. He passed the warehouse, now a thriving community center offering job training and support services. The steel mill was under renovation, its transformation into affordable housing ahead of schedule. Even the courthouse had changed, its steps now hosting regular forums on justice and reconciliation. At home, Aaron studied the photographs on his mantle. His father's image seemed to smile with approval next to the Navy Cross and the newly restored photo of them together. The quiet man stirred, remembering other missions, other victories. But this one felt different, more lasting, more profound. A text message lit up his phone, a photo from Sarah. She'd captured the sunset over Maple Grove, the light painting the sky in shades of hope. Below it she'd written, "Some stories change lives, some change entire communities. Thank you for giving me this one to tell." The next morning brought more students, more opportunities to teach and guide. Aaron moved among them with quiet authority, showing them not just how to fix engines, but how to build connections, how to be part of something larger than themselves. Marcus arrived early again, this time with news about his campaign. "We're organizing a youth council," he explained excitedly, "getting kids involved in community decisions, making sure all voices are heard." Good. Aaron's approval was quiet, but sincere. Leadership isn't about being in charge. It's about lifting others up. The day passed in a blur of teaching and repairs. Each interaction, each moment of connection, added another thread to the community's new tapestry. The garage had become more than a business. It was a symbol of transformation, a place where change began. As evening approached, Aaron stood in the doorway of his garage, watching the sun set over Maple Grove. The quiet man stirred one last time, not in preparation for battle, but in satisfaction at a different kind of victory. His father's voice seemed to whisper on the breeze. Sometimes the greatest strength isn't in fighting battles, but in showing others how to build peace. Aaron smiled as darkness fell. The shadows still held their secrets, still concealed a warrior ready to defend his community. But now they held something more, the promise of continued change, of a town that had learned to be its own light in the darkness. And in Maple Grove, that light would shine for generations to come. But what would you have done in Aaron Cole's position? Would you have shown the same restraint when faced with hatred, or would you have chosen a different path? If this story of justice and redemption spoke to you, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales of hidden warriors and the battles they fight in plain sight. And remember, the quiet ones are always the ones you should watch most carefully. Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to share this video if you want others to discover the legend of the Phantom. Until next time, keep your eyes on the shadows. You never know who might be watching.